Hey, it's CDA, and today I have another guide on Alchemy Factory for you. So today we're going to be talking about the part of the game where I think most people quit. Phase 6 is where the complexity really starts ramping up, and it is extremely easy to get lost in the mechanics, and especially the new cauldron that we will unlock during this phase is going to open up so many more possibilities to continue that it's kind of overwhelming, to be honest, but don't worry, I've got your back covered. Before we get into it, if your factory looks something like this and you've been following along, well, you will notice that we're kind of running out of space. So luckily, there is no such thing as a lack of space in this game, because all we need to do is just build up. Building up is really straightforward. You just build a wall around your entire factory, and then you will need to add some pillars for support, because otherwise you won't be able to cover everything. You need a stairs upstairs, and there you go. You have another nice little platform to work with. Now, as you can see, I left a pretty large area open in the middle. That is mostly because I think it's convenient to be able to easily get stuff down. But honestly, you could pretty much close up this entire thing. I would also recommend that you, if you want, work with the smaller type of platform like this, the quarter ones, because if you need a hole in this floor for whatever reason to get stuff up or down, then it's a lot easier to just delete a small platform rather than the big one. But you can just work with the big ones because I do think they look better, as long as you're a little bit conscious about where you might want to put in some lifts. Also, if you haven't done so yet, make sure you grab your upgrades because, especially the inventory space is going to be extremely useful moving forward. It's also worth noting that I did put a little thought into how I designed my factory. So you can see I have my customers just sticking to the middle over here, with the stairs to the next level also kind of originating from that same area. So if I want, I can just build a nice little selling area over here without my customers again getting in the way of the rest of my factory, as long as I keep it to the outside of that. This is also the part of the game that if you haven't done so yet, you might want to set up an infinite money farm for the dispatch portals using the Gloom Spores contract that you should have unlocked by now. And you can very easily do so by using the blueprints I showed you in the previous episode. So you have the coke powder build over here, you have a build for the Advanced Fertilizer, then of course a Jupiter build for free experience. That is going to absorb all those additional planks you're going to be producing. And then you can use the Vitality Potion build, but without the actual assembler making the Vitality Potions, to just export the Gloom Spores. So the Gloom Spores in that build were being made at 10 per minute, and that means that you can start dispatching them through a dispatch portal instead. Just make sure that you export your money out until you're on your money belt. So you can see I have a little bit of a bus going on around my factory. So I have some fuel, I have some fertilizer, and then the bottom belt is going to be where all the money is. And then I'm going to be making sure that that money is getting sorted into single stacks of 1 coin. And yeah, at some point this is all going to back up, but that is just fine because the money will start just to collect in the dispatch portals themselves. But still, feel free to skip all the dispatching stuff because you really don't need to, as long as you just pick up as many levels in customer management as you can. Every 4 levels you will get an additional quest. The last one you will get at level 12. At level infinite you just get additional rewards. So yeah, this is going to give you a whole bunch of quests every day to complete, and that's going to give you way more money than you ever need. Okay, so let's dive into the actual factory building part of this phase. I would suggest that you do this every time from now on when you make a new level to your factory. Set up your bus first. So you want money, fertilizer, and fuel all around the edges of your factory. That just makes it so much easier to reach. It also makes it way easier to identify where your problems are, etc, etc. However, there are some tricks to this. It's important when setting this up that you pay attention to the direction in which your bus with the fuel, the fertilizer, money is running, because you want to set up your fuel in a position that it starts first supplying your fertilizer. So that means the fertilizer always has first priority on fuel, and then the fertilizer production should be running into anything that's essential. For example, in this case, the Jupiter build. If the Jupiter build isn't running, my fertilizer production will also stop. So this should have first priority on the fertilizer that is going to be on the middle belt. And if you just want to make sure things keep running for a very long time and start up very efficiently, just put a couple of stacks of fertilizer into the main bottlenecks of this build. That will just make sure you kind of get your seeds, literally your seeds, I guess, in this case, going. And that just means you won't have to wait as long for everything to kick into gear. And when it comes to the money belt, of course, make sure it's actually connected to the rest of your factory, with either with belts or just with some cannons or stuff like that. But yeah, you do want to make sure you always have money flowing into your supply lines. Once you've set that up and you have everything kind of flowing, so you're good to go, we want to start unlocking copper powder. You can make copper powder in a couple of different ways, but the way we will want to start doing this initially is by making it from iron sand and soap powder. Now, soap powder is just by grinding some soap into the powder, so that's super straightforward because we already have a soap built, and the iron sand itself is also going to be really straightforward because you just grind the iron ingots that we already can produce since, I think, episode 1 into the dust that we need. Step 1, we're going to need 6 of these furnaces with some iron smelters on top of them. And we need iron ore to go in all of those things and out in here in the middle. And then in order to turn those iron ingots into iron sand, you're really going to want to use the enhanced grinder because you're already going to need 15 of these to turn a single belt of ingots into a single belt of sand. It's all a single belt, by the way, so you can just connect everything up as long as you make sure you have 15 of these. Then we're also going to need some soap. Now that's very straightforward because we already made a build for that earlier. I'm using the exact same build with some slight modifications. I removed one of the flax nurseries because we have the advanced fuel now, the advanced fertilizer I mean. And other than that, everything is pretty much exactly the same. I did remove the planks that we had here before with just some stand-ups, just to have everything a little bit more accessible. But yeah, we need a total of a full belt of soap, and the original build only made 20 per minute. So there you go, that's all we need. Now, we just need to grind the soap. And once we have the 3 grinders we need in order to make the soap into soap powder set up, all we need is an ethanol, and that will be able to set to the recipe for copper powder. And then we will have both copper powder as well as impure copper powder coming out of this thing. Now remember, because the recipe is for copper powder, that should be coming out of the golden arrow, the yellow arrow, and then the other arrow will be the impure version of that. Now, the powder itself is not actually all that useful. We want to smelt stuff out of this. But luckily, all we need to do is put the powder into a crucible and we'll get 2 things. We will turn the impure powder into bronze ingots and the pure powder into copper ingots. So the nice thing about this particular build is because you're producing 2 new resources all at once, you can actually add in 2 more new resources very easily. In your technology tree, you will have the copper bearings, which are made from the copper bars, and you will have these bronze rivets, which are made from the bronze bars. And all you need to do is just add a single processor for each type to the build. And of course, I duplicated the build because we do also want the normal ingots. But these things you can actually sell. You will get 15 per minute from the bronze, and you will get 10 per minute from the copper into copper bearings. If you really want to, by the way, you can actually turn the impure copper powder into pure copper powder. You will lose half of it though, so it's not a massive increase of the production. But if you already have enough bronze, well, you might as well just get a little bit extra copper. All you need to do is just refine it once more. And as you can see, there we go. Now we have both of these. I'm going to be a little bit lazy this time around. I'm just going to keep the storage up here, and I'm going to set these cannons to catapult it all the way down there into my shop. And yeah, that works, and that's why I left this all open. And as always, just be a little bit careful when you unlock these things. Make sure you can start producing them pretty quick if you're relying on the quest, because as you can see, the game really likes giving you quests that have some of the new items in them. Funny thing is, we're not even done yet with this build, because there's yet another 2 things we can make with it. We are going to be unlocking Malachite, which also uses the copper dust in order to make this. We're going to need some impure copper powder, like I said, and some clay powder on top of that. Now, for the impure copper powder, we're just going to use the exact same build all over again, with the difference that we are still smelting the stuff into the bearings, because you need a fair few of these bearings, so you might as well keep producing them. I even have the catapult here ready for that to go, or cannon, I mean. But we're no longer melting down the impure copper powder. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to use the very ancient build by now. This is, I think, from the first episode, actually, where we are making clay, 15 clay per minute to be exact, which is exactly what we need in order to make our malachite. So for the malachite, the impure copper powder is going to come exactly from the same build once more. In this case, we are also producing some copper, so you might as well just keep making that into bearings. You need a fair few of those anyway. But for this build, we're no longer smelting the impure copper powder, because we're going to need to combine that with some clay powder instead. We're going to need 15 clay powder per minute, and that's actually very easy to produce because we've already done that in the very beginning of the game. All you need is 3 stone crusher and a whole bunch, 12 to be exact, of the grinders in order to grind all of that stuff into sand. We're also going to need 1 table saw connected to a double crucible setup on a little furnace over here. That is then going to be grinding the charcoal this is going to be producing into charcoal powder. We can combine those 2 items into a assembler to make the clay, and then of course we only need a normal grinder, just a normal one, to make the clay powder. And then we can bring in the impure copper from the initial build along with the clay powder into an ethanol to start making some malachites. Now we're also going to get some crude shards as a byproduct, for which we currently don't really have any use, so you can throw them in the trash until you have something that you can use it for. Next up on the list is salt. Even though there's 2 different ways of making salt, I would always recommend using the stone crusher version of it, because honestly, if you set up the ethanol type of production, you're going to need to set up a massive amount of infrastructure just to get this going. And you know, the rock salt version is just very easy. You buy some rock salt, you put it in the stone crusher, and you're done. In order to get a full belt of salt, you're going to need 6 of those stone crushers making that salt. And of course, per stack of 3, you're going to need a filter splitter to make sure that the sand you're going to be producing as a result of that is being dealt with. Again, for the moment, I'm just throwing it away. The nice thing about this particular recipe is that it's pretty much cost neutral. So 1 salt is worth 100 copper, and you're going to need about 90 copper to make this stuff. So this is not the most efficient in terms of cost to make this stuff, but you know, this is all you need in order to make salt. So the alternative recipe is going to be way much more. And if you actually find a use in your builds for this sand, then of course it's just a bonus and it's a free, easy way of getting that sand. It's going to be a full belt of sand, so take that into consideration. However, now we're going to get to the meat of this episode, because we're going to start to make some of the more advanced recipes that require massive amount of inputs. So the Saturn, for example, needs salt, it needs bricks, and it needs glass. And this is exactly where I think most people kind of break down and get overwhelmed by the sheer amount of stuff that you need in order to make these at an acceptable rate. So even if you just want to make 1 Saturn per 10 minutes, then you're going to need a full belt of glass and bricks and salt. Now the salt itself, like we just did, is not very complicated, but the other 2 things, well... Now, don't get me wrong, you can still do it the normal way. For example, if you need a full belt of glass, you can just copy and paste the build we've already made for glass 6 times, which is exactly what I've done over here, and this would get you what you need. Or you can use this build instead, that is going to rely on the cauldrons doing most of the work, and that is going to be producing the same amount of glass, so an entire belt full, for about 2/3 of the footprint in your factory, so it's going to save you quite a bit of space, as well as about 2/3 or less of the cost that it will require to make that glass in the normal way. So yeah, this build is strictly better than the normal one because I'm saving space and I'm saving materials. So what I'm doing over here is I'm using the cauldron recipe that turns 3 items of flax into 1 item of stone, and it will do so at about the same speed as a stone crusher would make stone. So you will need 3 of these to fill up a belt. Yes, I know it's going to be running slightly under optimum efficiency, but it's close enough for me not to want to add another cauldron to the mix. And this build is super straightforward. All I'm doing is bringing in some fertilizer in the back that's going to go into these nurseries. Each nursery will produce 1 belt of flax that is going to go into a single cauldron, so it's a 1-on-1. And then these 3 cauldrons are going to be producing a total of 1 belt of stone, so you can just combine all of those outputs together. Then that's going to be run through 12 grinders, so that's just a stack of 12 like this, 3x4 stack. And that's going to produce a full belt of sand, and that sand is then going to go into the kiln over here, and we'll start putting out 10 per minute glass, and you do that 6 times, and you have a full belt. It's also worth noting that because I'm using 3 times the same item in the cauldron, it's impossible for the cauldron to mess up. I'll get to that in a moment when we're going to be using some different combinations, but yeah, this is about as simple as a cauldron use is going to get. In a similar way, let's make a cauldron build to make ourselves some bricks rather than making them the old-fashioned way. This time around, we're going to start out with a stack of 3 nurseries once more. One of them is going to be producing red currants, and the other 2 are going to be producing sage. One of the outputs of the sage nurseries is going to go into a couple of grinders and making the sage powder. And this time around, we're going to need 4 cauldrons to absorb all those materials. Now I see a lot of people making these constructs to get all of those materials up here quite complicated. The way I like doing it is not necessarily the most space efficient, but it is a very easy way to build this thing up. So for example, over here, I need 4 of these belts going up. So I'll just do this and I'll set this to the 2nd level, and then I'll walk to the other side, and then I will raise this up to the 3rd level. And then for the last one, I will make sure that I add in a little bit of a platform. And then I can add this up to the last level. Now, all I need to do is add in some platforms, and voila, the one side is connected to a single resource. So now all I need to do is make sure that stuff can actually get in. Is this, again, the most space efficient? No, but you just saw me build this entire setup in a couple of seconds, so it's really quick and easy. And you can just replicate that on the other sides as well. And what's even better, because this is so simple, you can just copy and paste it to the other side once you're ready to go, and there you go. And of course, you can use a very similar building strategy for the outputs as well. It just makes it super easy to just rinse and repeat this every time you have a stack of cauldrons that you need materials to get in and out of. In this case, the cauldrons are going to be producing the 60 clay per minute that we need, so I'm going to need a total of 6 kilns to make sure we can transform all of that clay into the actual bricks we need. Okay, so now we have a build that makes salt, we have a build that makes glass, and we have a build that makes brick. But how are we actually going to make sure these things start up and keep working? Because cauldrons are quite tricky. Okay, so first things first, we're going to need some of everything that will go into the cauldrons, not just from the build itself, but you want some stacks of that in your inventory. So which is why I have a couple of these nurseries just making all of the plants, because that's all I'm using in the cauldrons for the moment. So I can pick up some of these stacks and use those in my factory. Then you're going to go and place down your first build. In this case, this is my salt build, and you're going to fill up the cauldron with all the stuff that is actually going to go in there with a full stack. So you want as much stuff in your cauldron before you start it up as you can fit in there. You're then going to connect the fertilizer and make sure there's as much fertilizer going in there as possible, so you don't make that your next bottleneck. Now you're going to let these nurseries run until the entire belt towards your cauldrons is filled up. And while you're waiting, make sure you set up enough fuel and fertilizer for your builds to function, because you never want them to stop at all. So there should be no bottlenecks in your supply line. Which is also why for these more complicated builds, I make sure I set things up modular, because, well, for example, the salt build by itself takes up almost a full belt of fertilizer, depending on how many upgrades you have. So yeah, I'm gonna go fertilizer, salt, fertilizer, and then the rest of the build. Oh, and as a side note, if you're like me, lazy and don't want just to keep building Jupiters, you can also just throw away the planks that you're making in your fertilizer build. At this point, that's not gonna make a huge impact on your output. Once all the belts come to a standstill, that means all the cauldrons are completely filled up, and that's also the reason why we pre-fill these cauldrons, to make sure that it doesn't take forever. Which means it is now time to connect the fuel to make sure the cauldrons actually start working. And we repeat this for the other builds as well, so make sure you fill everything up until the belts come to a standstill, so all the cauldrons are completely filled up, and then you can connect the fuel and you're good to go. And then as soon as you have all your belts up and running, all you need to do is make sure they go into a shape where you can start making your Saturns. Now remember, these Saturns are not only very nice to sell, but they also give you way more experience than your Jupiters. So in this case, what I've decided to do is make sure I'm first using a priority splitter to make sure I get some stuff in my storage boxes over here. The remaining stuff is going to go, half of that is going to go into my knowledge altar, and the other half is going to go through this catapult, into this thing, into this cannon, onto a relic seller, just to make sure that I can also sell them to my customers. I'm not a huge optimizer when it comes to getting as many experience points as I need, but honestly, if you do want to prioritize getting your points in, and honestly, that is a very good thing to do, then by all means, just make sure that you never sell your relics to your customers, just use them for experience instead. Speaking of upgrades, I hope by now it's clear that you're going to be using a lot more fertilizer than you're going to use fuel. So always make sure you upgrade your fertilizer first before you start upgrading your fuel. And then if you have points left, if you really want to optimize, feel free to start upgrading your factory itself. But then in that case, make sure you start with your belts, because you do not want to mess up your cauldrons, and then start upgrading your factory efficiency itself. And always make sure you first take one level of logistics efficiency and then take a level of factory efficiency. And I can't say this often enough, make sure that there's no bottlenecks with regards to your cauldrons, because if this balance is off and for some reason one of these stacks runs out and the other inputs are not going to be running out, then that will overflow and you will get a completely different item from your cauldrons, and you're pretty much going to have to just delete the entire build and have it completely started up again. So yeah, try not to do that. One way to safeguard against that is to make sure you have filter splitters between different parts of your factories that use cauldrons. That's some way to make sure that you kind of safeguard against them messing up, but honestly, this isn't a far from perfect solution, so just make sure that they're not going to be messing up to begin with. Oh boy, I actually made a mistake in this build, because it turns out that if I have 4 of these cauldrons in the clay build, there's more production than I have supply, so at some point the cauldrons start messing up, and you can see there is iron sand where there should be clay. So yeah, I need to go down to 3 cauldrons, which does mean that this build will be working at about 85% efficiency, but that's still better than it coming to a grinding halt every now and then because it starts producing iron sand. It might feel like you're nearly at the end of this phase, but we have several very complicated items still to make. Now, all of these things are very valuable, so it's going to be worth making them, but yeah, we are definitely going to need to make advantage of the cauldron recipes in order to make sure that these builds do not grow into oblivion. Before we continue, keep an eye on your sales as well. Make sure that your money can actually go somewhere. So having a couple of bank portals at least to make sure your belt gets supplied, and upping the required amount to about 4 silver per stack does actually help speed things up. There's an overflow box in here just in case my money belt gets to a standstill. So that means people can actually keep selling, because there is a limit to how much money fits into this register. And I just have a couple of stacks over here to make sure that I have somewhere to place all the money I get for my quests. At this point, you should get some pretty juicy quests to earn some money with, and also make sure, of course, that your belt can support that. So having a couple of bank portals and increasing the stack size of your silver will go a long way towards making sure you have somewhere to store your money. Okay, let's pick up the speed a little bit. Let's start making some growth potions. This is going to make fertilizing everything a lot easier once we have this up and running. Due to our belt limits, I'm going to keep this build to 10 growth potions per minute, otherwise we'll just have to duplicate belts and stack them on top of each other and stuff like that, which also means we are going to need 40 salt per minute, which we can use our previous build for. I took off the top 2 stone crushers, so this is the exact same build, nothing new here, just removed a little bit of it, and I also added in a couple of extractors because we need the brine rather than the salt itself. Next up is a belt of clay. Now, of course, this is going to be the exact same build we just made for the brick, just minus the kilns. So we have the 60 clay per minute that we need. And then all I need to do is add in a couple of grinders to grind the clay into powder. And then I need 2 nurseries making chamomile and a single grinder to make that 20 per minute into chamomile powder. Now it's worth noting that you only technically need 1 nursery if you fertilize this with the growth potion itself, but making sure this thing also runs when I have Advanced Fertilizer, which is a little bit less fertile, of course, just makes this more flexible and means I also don't have to worry about mixing up 2 different types of fertilizer on my belts. And then last but not least, we need an advanced blender to make the growth potion itself. And look at that, that was a very easy and very quick with all the pre-work we've already done. And with this very easy way to make a growth potions, it's time for the next thing, because we want to make some black powder. Black powder is about 5 times efficient as the coke powder, so this is going to make fueling everything a lot easier. This is surprisingly easy to make, so all we need is a couple of table saws. That will give me a full belt of planks, which I'm then going to turn into charcoal by putting them into a crucible. However, we're going to use the new type of crucible because we need 4 of them, and these stackable crucibles, well, they stack, so you can put them all on top of each other, similar to the cauldrons, and thereby making it a little bit more space efficient on our furnaces. Then we're going to turn the belt of charcoal into some charcoal powder by throwing them through 2 of these enhanced grinders. Then we're going to use a familiar setup with 2 furnaces and 2 iron smelters to turn pyrite ore, that's a new type of ore we've just unlocked, and turn that into sulfur and iron ingots. Because we have 2 outputs, that of course means we need another filter to make sure we have the sulfur on one belt and we have the iron ingots on another belt. We'll deal with where those belts are going in a second because we need 1 more item. And then we're going to need 2 stone crushers making stone, and I'm using a slightly different setup than I've used before because the shelves are just a little bit too wide. And if you use the beams, the second version of the beam to be exact, so it's these ones, and then you can just shift their material as well as their size. The second one is just large enough to fit a crusher and 2 walls next to it with tiny little blocks, and it makes it nice and compact compared to the shelf version. Anyway, we will need another 4 crucibles to turn this stone into quicklime, and then the quicklime into the quicklime powder by means of 2 enhanced grinders. And this build is almost symmetric. It looks kind of nice. You could make it completely symmetric if you would want to, but yeah, I like keeping things a little bit compact as well. And then all I need is another advanced blender, because 2 extractors will turn the quicklime into lime water, and then those 3 items combined will make the 10 black powder per minute. And before you put all the black powder onto your belts, make sure you also keep in mind that you will need this to sell. And of course, don't forget we also had that 15 iron ingots per minute that we had as a side product. Again, I'm just throwing it away for now, but if you want to make it useful, by all means go and do that. 3 items to go, and let's go for the Mars next. This is another relic. This one is 280 silver, so super valuable, but it also costs a massive amount of resources to make. However, thanks to the black powder as well as the growth potions build, this is going to be a lot easier. So make at least 1 of those black powder builds and at least 2 more of those growth potions built, because we're going to be needing them. First up on the list are nails and screws, and the screws we can just make with the build that we've made before. Now the build that we've made before is only going to be producing 20 per minute, so we're going to build it twice. And yes, that is a little bit too much, but sometimes it's just nice to keep using the old build and be efficient. Now remember that we were throwing all the iron away in our black powder build. Let's put it to use now. All we need to do is hook them up to 4 processors making nails, and we have a full belt of nails and some iron still to spare, so the remainder is still being thrown away, but at least most of it is being put to use. Then all we have left to unlock are the bronze rivets and the copper bearings, but the problem with that is that this build that we've made before that is producing both of those things is pretty large, and it's only producing a small amount of this. So we would actually need to build this 4 times in order to have enough production. So again, let's turn to the cauldron. And next step is we are going to be reusing our salt build. Now this is the salt build that's using the cauldrons, so again, make sure you start it up properly. And while those are starting to gear up, we can put 2 nurseries making chamomile right next to there in order to make sure we get some more chamomile and chamomile powder. For those 2 nurseries, it's really important that you hook them up to the growth potions directly, because you do not want any other fertilizer in here. If you do, they're going to be producing too slow and your cauldrons will be messed up. And then we're going to take the salt, the chamomile powder, and the chamomile, and we're going to be putting that into 5 cauldrons. Now again, make sure that you let these cauldrons completely fill up and make sure that all the belts come to a standstill before you put any fuel into these furnaces. And there we go, we have about 46 impure copper ore per minute, and that all in the space of about the same area that 1/3 of the other build would fit. So I would say this is pretty space efficient, but of course we have a few more actions to go. On the side where we have 3 cauldrons, I'm going to use 2 refiners to refine the impure copper powder to the pure version. So this is going to be about 15 per minute, slightly less. And then on the side where we have 2 cauldrons, I'm going to make sure we have a couple of crucibles, 4 of them to be precise, to make sure we get about 20 bronze ingots per minute. And then finally, we're going to melt the copper ore into some ingots and turn those into bearings, and then the bronze into bronze rivets. And that should get us everything we need. This is going to be about a full belt of bronze rivets. This is going to be about a full belt of copper bearing. Yes, it's all approximate, but that's just how the cauldron works. And then last but not least, and we can finally start producing our 3rd relic, the Mars. And that will go into a very similar setup as what I've used before. So a box to store the ones we want to sell. Then the other remaining ones, if there's ever overproduction, will go into either a knowledge altar or into the sales just in my shop. It's being split 50-50, so I never have to really worry or think about it anymore. That means we are down to 2 items left in this phase, and luckily this is going to be a little bit more straightforward. Now keep in mind, you're probably running low on space at this point, so we might as well expand, and I'll show you a nice little trick. So you know how these pesky streets tend to get in the way of you making a large super factory? Well, As long as you have a wall on the edge of both of the sides of the street, you can just build over it, and as you can see, that basically allows you to double the volume of the building platform you have to work with on every level of your factory. So in hindsight, I should probably have chosen to leave some room open over here to make this a little bit more easy to utilize. But hey, it is what it is, and we can just use it for like this moving forward. As long as you build a wall on both sides of the edges of the platforms, you have exactly enough wing space basically to make sure your rooms overlap from side to side. So yeah, this pretty much allows you to double the size of your factory by just taking the cheapest plots outside of your original kind of like area in the back of your factory, doubling up the size you have to work with. And honestly, this is going to be plenty of room to work with for now. The pocket watch build is now super easy to make because all we need is gear, bearings, and glass, which we've all done before. So let's start by just making another black powder build and another growth potion build just because we can. And then we add in the exact same build for the steel gears for 20 of them per minute. We're also going to need some copper bearings, and we will need copper ingots to make them. I'm gonna go back to the original build for this, mostly because this is super straightforward and it doesn't rely on any cauldrons. And it actually happens to produce exactly enough what we need for the pocket watches. But of course, in considering I don't have any use for bronze out of this specific build for this time around, I'm gonna refine the impure copper ore into the pure version. Then I have 2 of these crucibles making the ingots, and then we have 2 of these processors making the bearings, one of which will only be working at half speed, so this is going to give me 15 bearings per minute. But TDA, why don't we just use the cauldron build? Well, I try to kind of reuse my older blueprints as much as possible so I don't duplicate a lot of work for myself. And this blueprint does exactly what we need to do. And yes, it's not the smallest one in the world, but we don't need the output for the larger one. So this is just a matter of me being pragmatic. It's also a matter of really being modular, like I mentioned earlier in this episode. If you do want to make specific builds for every type of item, that are kind of just that you can just paste down and do that with, you could. But there's also another problem with that, and that is that you might simply not have enough inventory space to deal with some of those mega blueprints that you end up making. So keeping it modular and keeping it kind of like dedicated to exactly what it needs to do is probably the most efficient way to play this game. Which is also why I'm just reusing the same build we made for glass earlier, and then we have all the components that we need in order to start making some pocket watches. Anyway, once we have this set up, all we need to do is add a couple of assemblers, and this is going to be producing 7.5 pocket watches per minute, which is plenty. But if you want even more than that, remember that if you now save up a couple of those, you can go to your quest overview over here, complete this quest, you only need 20 of them, and you will get another purchase contract, which is going to allow you to sell pocket watches. Actually, this is a pretty good contract because they sell for 26 silver, and you can deliver up to 960 per day without any upgrades. So yeah, another way to make pretty much infinite money. And that means there's just one last item we need to make for this phase. Luckily, this last build is super easy. We just need a little bit of sulfur, which we can make from a very similar setup that we used for the black powder. Remember, you do need to split off the iron that is going to come out from this as a side product, so you do whatever you want to do with that. But the main thing is we need 10 sulfur per minute. Then we add the same Gloomspore build to that we've used before. Now I adjusted it a little bit because before we were feeding it back up here to dispatch, but now I'm just feeding this belt forward so we can use it elsewhere. And then we have this nice little line of nurseries where we just add a single one to that. This one will be making chamomile, and that is going to be grinded into chamomile powder. And then once you have done all of that, all you need to do is put them into a single advanced assembler, making the unstable catalyst that I currently have on display over here. Now this build is small enough that you can easily make a template out of this, so you have another building block that you can use in other builds moving forward. And that will be kind of key in my opinion from this point on. Yes, you can make dedicated builds for everything else, like I've mentioned before, but that will take you a lot of time. Don't get me wrong, it could be a lot of fun, but most efficient in terms of gameplay and getting through the last bits of the game is doing it like this. Now, speaking of the last bit of the game, we're pretty close to the end. I mean, the last couple of steps in the technology tree are fairly small, There's a lot of work to be done, don't get me wrong, but you can kind of build on what you've got so far. And with the growth potions unlocked, the next thing will be the blast potions. That gives you kind of the baseline for the end game. So hopefully you found all of this useful. I think this is probably a pretty long guide. I think I have like 130 segments recorded without editing yet. But still, let me know if in the comments if you have any questions, and make sure if you made it this far that you like the video. It really helps me out, and subscribe to the channel maybe if you want to see more. Now, if you are still here, you are awesome, and I do hope to catch you in the next one.